Hello and welcome to Sattva Yoga Therapy Conversations. This podcast is a space for yoga teachers who sense that yoga can do more. So today, more and more students are coming to yoga seeking support for anxiety, burnout, chronic pain, life transitions, and complex health conditions. And many teachers feel called to help, but may not always feel prepared. Through thoughtful conversations, practical insights, we will explore how therapeutic yoga supports real people navigating real challenges. So whether you're simply curious about yoga therapy or beginning to feel that it might be part of your professional path, you are welcome here. This podcast is presented by Prana Yoga Institute and the Sattva Yoga Therapy method, an integrative approach to therapeutic yoga, and is grounded in relationship, clinical reasoning, and the wisdom of traditional yoga and Ayurveda. I'm your host, along with co-host Kierra Boylan. This is Dani Wasson, yoga therapist and founder of Prana Yoga Institute. And I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started.
Hi.
Hi. Welcome. I'm Danielle Wasson and founder of Prana Yoga Institute.
And I'm Kierra Boylan, Sattva Yoga therapist.
And this is our first podcast, still a podcast with no name, but welcome. We're going to have lots of conversations about yoga therapy and yoga in general. And we would love to start today with a grounding, a centering, and an awareness practice that we use in our classes and in our training. So if you just want to take a moment to tune in to your own physical body and your surroundings, and just take a moment to integrate into where you're at in your day and noticing how you feel in your body right now. And sometimes we can feel a distance between us and our bodies. Sometimes we feel a closeness with sensations that feel either good or not good. And so I'll just invite you to start to take a light and draw that down through your body. Noticing sensations, just saying hello to them. You can name them as pleasant or not pleasant. And saying hello from your head all the way down to the tip of your toes. And connecting in with your energy right now. Is it high, low, somewhere in between? Your mind and emotion. Sometimes we can even sense those emotions, again, as a closeness. We'll just take a few deep breaths together, breathing in through the nose, out through the nose or pursed lips. May this conversation be nourishing to us all. And when you're ready, starting to blink open your eyes. Welcome. So today's conversation, this is our first podcast, and I feel like, we have these conversations around the studio often, Kierra and I. And so this podcast has been kind of in the making for a long time. Like, oh, we should definitely.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of talk, a lot of
talk about it. And recently something came across my feed that was about hands-on assists. And so I sent you that message and said, hey, we need to have what do you think about this? It's our podcast that's coming up. So we're probably starting with, the first one that can, really have polarizing perspectives on it, and that is hands-on assists. And there is certainly a scope of practice within yoga therapy, since we're both yoga therapists, with hands-on assists from our accrediting body, IYT, so we can discuss that as well. But I'd like to start just with the images that came across my Instagram and what we saw there about hands-on assists. And the first one, it was a carousel. And so the first one was pretty disturbing if you're looking at it out of context. Again, you might not know. I've seen this. It's libdo. I think it's women's liberation and like sexual liberation. I don't really know exactly what they sell. So, or what kind of services they provide. So I'm not 100% sure, but, definitely like pelvic floor health. And so it was two women, and it looked like what could look like abuse and abusive assist. Now that's taken out of context of whatever that platform was, but it was showing that. And then the next one was showing a male Pilates instructor kind of leaning in with his shirt off and moving with a student on a reformer. And then it went into showing yoga assists and saying that this is no different. And it talked a lot about consent and how we might be forced to feel like we have to receive an assist from a teacher, which I think is valid. And I think at first, what really got to me at first about this particular post, of course, we don't have context for any pictures, and this happens a lot in social media. So I think it does take communication and conversations like this to get that context or think about it from different perspectives. But I went into the comments and teachers that were saying like, I really love assists. At first, I think some of these have been taken off. So maybe there was a change of heart, but it was like, you're gaslighting this issue. So I'd like to discuss both sides of this. Also recently, and I don't think I've showed you this one, it was a few days ago, there was a post taken again from BKS Iyengar, who's one of the Western, brought yoga to the West, the Iyengar method, for those of you that didn't know. Have you seen this one?
Mm-mm.
And in Iyengar yoga, and just to give a little context to what that is, there's different styles or lineages in the West from specific teachers that they've either branded or have been carried down as like the main teacher of that. And some would consider them a guru, a really high teacher. And in Iyengar style of yoga, which I did practice early on in my yoga career, a student would be brought to the center of the room and everyone would leave their mats. So really different than kind of our yoga in our yoga studios now, right? Unless you're doing a workshop. And everyone would come around that student and they would be, quote unquote, performing a pose and the teacher would correct them. Well, in this video, which is disturbing to watch, BKS Iyengar hits the student. You can tell she's very nervous because we're drawing her out of the crowd, bringing her there. She also is probably very excited. I don't know how she would feel, but to be with this master teacher of yoga and nervous and excited and who knows what other emotions. I can't speak for her, but he strikes her. And he says, now she'll remember that. I hit her so that she will remember what that pose feels like in her body. So maybe I'm digressing to a whole nother topic. But that was something that came across my feed recently. And, there's a whole context there about Iyengar yoga too. So any questions you have or want to ask about that too, because I've had some experience with that. And I was reading some of the comments again, and there was some higher, more higher level yoga teachers that I really respect saying, hey, this is taken out of context, look at corporal punishment back to even in schools and with nuns, kind of striking the students. And we don't do that anymore. And even BKS Iyengar talked about Krishnamacharya, who was his teacher, who struck him. He said he had a heavy hand.
I think, one, it's important to consider the feeling, right? Like when I first watched the video that you had sent over to me, and even sitting with it, knowing what we're going to be talking about as we went through awareness, it was very here. And it was very, you get a feeling. And I think that reactive kind of quality is what a lot of us are aiming for on social media oftentimes. And also, like, that has an energetic quality to it. So you think about anything out of context can be harmful and can also be harmful, right? We don't know the story of this specific instance that was discussed. But I also think there are two sides to that. And does it, which is another topic, like, does it remove the essence of what's happening by like, really it is kind of reinstilling generational or cultural or whatever it is situations that can occur. So I guess my first question is how do we parse that out, right? As students, yoga students in a world where we do need to look at things like hierarchy, we do need to look at the patriarchy, we need to look at these systemic issues that come alongside these spiritual practices. and how to really sit with that in our own practice and develop our own knowledge, which yoga says that personal experience is the most valid form of knowledge, one of them. So how do you do that in a world where you open up social media? And you had said to me a couple weeks ago of, how when we watch a movie or we search something, there's a lot of choice in that, right? We're choosing to feel this like rom-com, I'm going to laugh, or I'm going to cry, or I'm going to be scared. And when we're engaging in social media, it's taking away our choice. And even in something that is talking about choice, is talking about consent, we're actually losing that.
Yeah.
Just through consuming.
Yeah.
So
we haven't signed off our consent to half of the stuff, probably 90% of the stuff that comes across our feed. And it's just hitting us here and here. Yeah, everywhere. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's important for me to have this podcast too is, if a yoga teacher sees that and then they take that out of context and they follow this person and they're like, okay, I'm never going to do assist. And I think that's something, we can just come right off the bat. And even though there's a lot of nuances to it, we're both pro assist here. So, we're the opposite. And I think talking through that, why we are pro assist can be useful. And that discernment, that's why we named our courses Sattva is discernment of when is it appropriate, when is it not appropriate. So you're not just following some external guidelines or lineage, that you really are assessing the person in front of you. You have developed a therapeutic relationship. And then we'll just share some of our experiences with assists. And I'm always like, anybody can ask me anything because I am a human being, sinful human being working on myself in front of others. And I would say, like, only checking in with my inner spirit. I'm sure there's time. I know for a fact there's times when I've done assists that were more for my own ego rather than truly for the student. Now, that doesn't mean that the student received them in that way, but the only thing we can do is check in with ourselves. So I'm totally open to check in and share any of that too.
So I think the first component of what you mentioned was therapeutic relationship. And I'm not sure, so if you're like a student of Sattva yoga therapy, you know what that means, but I'm not sure that other people would really understand the whole context around what a therapeutic relationship means. Could you talk a little bit about how does that show up in yoga therapy?
Yeah. A therapeutic relationship is something that develops over time in yoga therapy when we share this really non-dominating space with each other, where we do try to relieve the power differential. And of course, if someone's coming to you to receive a service that's going to support them in reaching their goals, there is always a little bit of a power differential. But how we talk about it is a genderless space. And so there is a lot of self-reflection that a yoga therapist has to do, a yoga teacher, if you're a yoga teacher, of, am I projecting something of that's happened to me or my own experience or ideas about what this person needs to fix them? And to me, a therapeutic relationship is when that is removed. We call it an agendaless space. And as the care seeker, which we call the person coming to receive yoga therapy, we are intelligent beings. We can feel that. So they have a feeling or a sense or a trust has developed there as well. Would you add anything else to that?
Because I have some experience in human development and training, we were talking about this before of, how there are principles that are required for humans to learn, grow, heal, develop. And you can see them mirrored throughout everything in the natural world. And one of those things is the importance of things like ritual, of order, of routine, and meeting people where they are and moving from simple to complex, which really is the root of Sattva yoga therapy. Yeah. So just like the toddler, right, when we're learning how to cut a banana for the first time with a knife, we do hand over hand. So we hold their hand and guide them through that process. And then eventually we let go and they're using a knife, a 15-month-old, and you're just like, what's happening right now? Because they're so capable.
Yeah.
And I think that yoga therapy, Sattva yoga therapy, is the same. A care seeker comes in. As yoga teachers, we say like hold space. a lot, that term. And you can even think about that in relationship to assist. I'm coming to this teacher who's holding space for me. And then you apply the therapeutic relationship, which is really, there is a power differential. You're coming for a service. I'm coming to you as the expert. So what I feel we do as yoga therapists is say, okay, like you've given me this space, like let's hold this together and we're going to share it. We're going to share the space now. Maybe I'm holding it and then I'm sharing it and now it's yours. It's all your space. So it's just shining light back onto them, which I do think is a core principle that has to be understood in order to understand our relationship with assist and knowing that we're human. How many times have I come into a class and it's like, I'm running the show of this class and it's through learning and it's a process. And that remembering that the person in front of me has their own healing potential. We are shining the light of consent, of ethical boundaries, of empowerment back onto them. So I do think to really begin to unfold that understanding, we have to recognize, I have to recognize, because I was kind of like born and raised with prana yoga and with you. And so it's sometimes very jarring to see other things that don't align with necessarily that we're sharing this together. This isn't about me showing up and performing because I don't think that's received everywhere. Yeah. So I do think that's the only thing. It's long-winded, but that I'd add.
Oh, absolutely. Not performing, that's a whole nother topic. But we can get into that with our sis. And I feel like I've definitely been in that. And I'll give a little context about my story of my different trainings and the lineages that I've been a part of. So before I was even a yoga teacher, I did practice Iyengar yoga. There wasn't really as many assists in that class, but we would kind of gather around the student for them to demo. So we would kind of put them in the spotlight. And we've done that through trainings to be able to see like someone can go from here to here. And I think it can be a positive experience, in given the right container. And then my first 500 hours and my yoga therapy, 3 years of yoga therapy was in cancer and chronic illness. 500 hours was more like hatha and integral and Vinyasa style. And my teachers were so against hands-on assists because one worked with trauma. She's an incredible teacher and Y12SR, Nikki Myers, great shout out to her. And then the other teacher that was part of that program had been injured by an assist. So of course, they subscribe to no hands-on assists. And then, of course, my teacher, Yanni Chapman, for cancer and chronic illness, we weren't doing hands-on assists, right? We were doing more like chair yoga and things like that and more subtle body things. So we weren't doing hands-on assists. Then once I started the studio, I'm like, I'm going to keep being a student. I'm going to go do some things for myself. So I entered the vinyasa world. And that's where we get a lot of hands-on assists. And you do just receive when you're in this group of maybe 100 people practicing with this vinyasa teacher and coming around. And I remember I was still pretty young in my body at the time. And so I know I could do this. But we were in like the full Ekapada Rajakapatasana and reaching back, and they just kind of lengthened my spine. I went back into a pose I could have never gotten into myself, and it just felt ecstatic. It didn't feel bad afterwards. I felt more capable. And so I followed that lineage for a while of prana vinyasa and, just beautiful assistants walking around. They were always just these stunning women. And it was like being held, by your mother.
We love you, Shiva.
We love you, right? Shiva. And then I went into Ashtanga with Richard Freeman and have received an assist through him too in extended side angles. So I know sometimes I'm using Sanskrit. The names of the poses, just skip over that if you don't know what it is. And there's something so I came back and taught and modeled according to some of that as well. But I was still a yoga therapist in the background. But something that always stuck with me is like, I love my teachers and none of them have harmed me or even though we didn't have a therapeutic relationship, a closeness, I really admired them. And I love being a student. I love being that open vessel to receive. And when I've received those assists and then I come to my mat and I'm in those poses that I received those assists and I'm like, oh, there's my teacher with me right now. So, even though that is a more hierarchical way and there's definitely image there and performance based there in the vinyasa world, I feel like they have good hearts because it was never harmful to me receiving the assists like that.
I also think there's what you're talking about is really like a flow of prana, of life force, and encouraging that life force.
Yeah.
And I do think it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition between this like performative achieving this experience to being in that relationship and understanding how together we're creating and moving to something else. And I do think the way that this Institute has really distilled that, the way you have distilled that and trained teachers has been as such to have the practice on our mat as teachers to recognize where am I showing up in this relationship and to also be able to be in relationship with the other. So that clear space. And we were talking about this and I talk about it all the time for any of our students that have heard me, you'll hear me say it again, but I remember so vividly coming to my first class at Prana and being so sick. I was so sick and I was so weak and I was just felt broken and I was looking for something to fix me. And I remember being guided through the class and of course it was a mandala practice, like, of course. So that's where you're moving in a circle and it's really emotion based and very like fluid and just all the stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember being guided into a one-legged standing pose and I couldn't lift my foot off of the earth. And my teacher came behind me and held me in that pose. And that was really like the toddler cutting the banana for the first time. That was me, right? And she was holding me in that space. And I think that for the first time, I got to experience expectationless love. And to experience that flow of prana in a new way of life force. And then one day I was able to stand on one leg and I didn't need that assist anymore. And it was my teacher. And every time I take that asana, like my teacher is with me too. So I think it's really important to understand how also the assist can be so beneficial in trauma work because being someone that's experienced domestic violence and sexual abuse and some other things to have that safety net and to develop trust in my own body and with others too. It was such an experience. Yeah.
And we are talking about group classes more in this situation or teacher training groups, where everyone really is showing up. But I do think we have such a unique community that it does feel very heart-centered and safe. And that doesn't mean you can guarantee that for everyone. But that is the feedback that I've gotten, that even those that have had sexual abuse and trauma, they looked forward to the type of agendaless touch from a woman, or we even have a teacher here she had a male that was one of her teachers, and she felt that and experienced that open-hearted, non-agendaless touch from him, which would even be more healing if you've been assaulted by a male. And you can, allow yourself to go there. Most of us probably couldn't. I don't know if I could. But yeah, starting kind of in that space where you feel comfortable and in group classes. And with that said, in my yoga therapy sessions, I'm not doing the same kind of vinyasa assists that we're doing in a group class. That kind of reminds me of another style, Jiva Mukti, and I studied with this brilliant teacher. I took my prenatal training from her, Lisa Matkins, ages ago, probably in like 2007. and she practiced Jivamukti. And at that time, you could sign up for someone to be on your mat with you the entire time, assisting your
Wow.
whole practice. And she said she did it, and this man showed up and assisted, and she's like, and then we got married. We fell in love. So, think about that in like Thai massage and things too. And we're working with the energy body. And so I think we're not as familiar with that in the West. And maybe that's why it shows up as more aggressive or just external, or I'm fixing you. It could be our Western mindset too.
Yeah. And I do think it brings up another kind of nuance and layer to that when we start talking about like Shakti and this like very expansive energy experience. And I can remember, so I've told our students this. I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but I can remember one time being in a session and you came and you gave me an assist. And I thought in my head, I was like, I think I'm in love with her.
I love you too.
And I do think there is this maybe misunderstanding at times because we're moving into maybe this experience of a posture or of a whatever it may be. And using assists to achieve something. And also understanding that experience, that feeling, you can begin to see how when you're working with energy and then you layer something like trauma and then you layer the like abusive constructs that can be there, how it can really get misinterpreted. Speaking from someone that had that open, like, oh my gosh, I've never experienced anything like this. And I think I love you, that just very, very powerful experience that can come from just your energy, your breath, your prana.
Absolutely.
And I think that's how, and even the scope of yoga therapy has really transitioned over time when it relates to assists. And there's a lot of nuances with scope of practice from Yoga Alliance and IOIT and how that's transformed even over the last few years. But to remember like the ethics involved in energy work, which is, it's all energy. That's not woo-woo.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. And there is something, healing energy is sexual energy as well. It's vitality. And that's why in Ayurvedic herbs, because I'm an Ayurveda practitioner as well, they're always like, well, this herb is going to increase your libido and everyone wants it, or this herb's an aphrodisiac. It's because you're getting well and you have more vitality flowing. And so if you do have someone that is in their ego, and we can all flip there, we're in a fallen world, I believe. And so anybody can misuse that power, which is why we're always like, come back to yourself. Listen, is it your ego that's involved with this? Because of course, I mean, there is so much abuse. And even in looking at what yoga sutras to use, it's just like all this power differential always leads, not always, but almost always leads to some sort of abuse there. And it's really disheartening. That's another.
So how do you, in that relationship, when you're sitting in your practice and thinking, like considering all of that, honor both, I want to use the like dual words of like good and bad, but that really doesn't, it doesn't have concept and form of what I'm trying to kind of articulate, parse out this experience, right? We have teachings from a guru or from a swami who has been accused of abuse, right? Who maybe has misused this assist, this energy work, all of the things that we're talking about. And when you're showing up in your practice and applying sattva, that discernment, how does that show up for you? And what do we take and what do we leave?
Like if I'm carrying on from that lineage, that for me, it's a spiritual question of who am I leaning on? Am I leaning on God or guru? And when we make someone that's human our God, of course they're going to let us down. And so I think that's the importance of, in any healing work, do you have your higher power? And I'm sure there's atheists that can do that just for the sake of the greater good. or humanity, and they have such strong values in place. So that we have to have a strong identity in our spiritual self and in our values to be able to not fear the practices that came from, a broken human. I'm Christian, so I believe the world is fallen. It's not perfect. And I also believe there can be heaven here on earth too, through relationships, through beautiful connections and the good in everyone. Yeah. I don't know. Did that answer?
Yeah, it did. It did. So I think for anyone kind of watching, maybe teachers or students who are in this space, when it comes to hands-on assist, when it comes on like, how am I going to show up in my classes now with all of this information?
Right.
What would you suggest
Yeah.
that they do?
Yeah, I think start with the awareness practice that we do with everything, because that's what's going to help you to be able to check in. Like I said earlier, am I walking into this room very performance-based and I want them to like me as a healer, helper? Or am I checking in with myself and I'm just here as a vessel to serve? And what kind of vessel am I? So I think the power of pause. So if you are going to help someone, whether you're in a group class or a one-on-one session, and you think this assist could be useful, not because it was taught to me or I know it or I just learned it at this cool workshop that I went to, but I think this could really be useful for this specific person because, and you have that, then you pause. And of course, we do want written consent. We do want to keep asking for consent. And I'll show you what that looks like in real time in a yoga therapy session, even with giving them some essential oil at the end, which some of my students love, and an eye pillow. And there's some people that do want that and some people that don't, or maybe a sandbag that also creates kind of that weight or earthiness of touch. Touch is can help be the earth as well as the air of the heart. I will say, I'm going to ask you this every time. So that clarity is kindness, and say, I know that you usually prefer an eye pillow, but I'm going to ask you that every time. And it's not because I don't remember or you're not important to me. It's because I want to make sure that it feels good today, because every day things might feel different. That's why yoga never gets old. Our bodies feel different. So I would say pause. Know your why you want to give them assists. Assists can be great because our hands can be like tools. They can be like props. They can transfer energy, which I do want to close with something with that. And love. My kids and I always had like thing like our hands are used for love. They come from our heart, our emotions. That's why we talk with our hands or we want to strike with our hands. So you can transmit that beautiful power of love through your hands. You can use it for proprioceptive awareness in a yoga therapy session. Like, hey, push into my hand right here. Ooh, did you feel those muscles line up? How does that activation feel now to support your goals? So there's many powerful ways that we can use our hands, and we continue with that ongoing consent and letting them know, I'm going to ask if this is okay.
I also, as both a care seeker and a yoga therapist, the power of choices and we talk about this a lot with our students who are becoming yoga therapists, of this balance between auto-suggestion and this open-ended experience of choice. And at times it can really create a safe container to give like a couple options of, does this sound like something that you would like, or does this, or so I think the power of choice and the framing of that too, because oftentimes I think what a lot of the content was revealing is, even though you might be presenting consent, it's not real because it's still performative. Like you're giving that option, but you're still expecting them to say yes, which I do think shows up. I do think there, it's that where I might offer something and someone says no, right? And you're like, then it's about me, not about anybody else.
Exactly.
And not just with assists, with anything. It's false choice then.
Right.
So how do you cultivate that is really and I do think really connects to that pursuit of spiritual practice, to be that vessel. And sometimes things come out from that relationship that you're like, I don't even know where that came from. Wasn't me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Like, tell them, like, it's okay to tell me no if you don't want this, if you sense any kind of hesitation. And if you're watching and witnessing your care seeker or student, you can sense their muscles tightening. You just walk right by. You don't give that assist. Or if they're holding their breath, like, are you sure it's okay? Okay, let's breathe together first, and then I'll give this. That's because, if they're just there to please you, and that's one thing, setting those expectations before you go into a yoga therapy session, like, we are here to collaborate to each other. You can ask me anything. You don't ever feel like you have to do a certain posture. And that can be, throughout the session of, I'm going to, recommend 5 breaths here, but if that's too long for you, come out, giving them that permission with other things too, not just touch. Because if you are saying, well, you can say no about receiving this adjustment, but then you're like, put your foot here, do this in a very directive way, that's going to give...
it's contradictory.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I also think there is this element of exchange that takes place when showing up in that relationship, how it's not even just about offering the choice, it is knowing when and how to uplift certain things. So an example of how my teachers have done that is when I've honored my experience and I haven't listened to them, then that is recognized as, wow, thank you. Yeah, thank you for doing that. And then you are kind of meeting them where they are in that, where they might still be trying to please you. Because that thank you for doing that, or great job doing that. I'm not great jobbing you for achieving the thing or for listening to me. It's for listening to you, which does kind of create that muscle memory of they actually like it when I honor my own self.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I think we've done a really great job cultivating that within our students too.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's so interesting to see in a living, breathing way of how our students that are becoming Sattva yoga therapists are doing that with each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to the therapeutic relationship. That is the thread of all of those good things that you brought up. Yeah. Well, I would love to end with just a little bit of teaching where I saw some correlation. And one is a Bible verse. It's John 14:12. And Mataji, who's a Swami at Satchidananda Ashram, actually shared this verse with me in one of our spiritual sessions one time. And I am acknowledging that one of my gifts of the Holy Spirit is touch and healing through touch. And that's hard to say. It feels like, because it is so close to the spirit and it feels weird to say that, but I'm trying to acknowledge those gifts. We all have those gifts. So I would love to hear what you know yours are. And then there's a Sanskrit word, pranacharya, which is the teacher of prana. It is that transference of energy. And you don't have to even touch to do that, to feel the love in the room and the connection in the room. And so John 14:12 says, truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these will he do, because I am going to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. So he is not even taking credit for the miracles, the works, the hands-on healing. And, when he says greater, I've researched, and it doesn't mean like bigger miracles or bigger things, but you can reach more people. You can continue this on like a lineage, and it doesn't come from us. And that's how I say stay grounded in something beyond lineage, beyond guru, beyond some method that a teacher that I love shows me. It's coming from ultimate source. And then pranacharya is life force energy or vitality or Holy Spirit, whatever you want to name that. And acharya is a teacher. And pranacharya is someone who lives in alignment with life force energy or spirit and supports healing through wisdom, presence, and practice. Wisdom, presence, and practice. So I would say that is therapeutic relationship. That is sattva, the discernment of wisdom, the presence of that agendaless space, and then practice, because we have to, it's not perfect. We're not human, or we're not perfect beings, divine beings. We're human. And that healing is transmitted through relationship, not owner. That is like, that's what I wanted to end with.
So 3 things, wisdom, presence, practice, and then within all of that, relationship, which is yoga.
Which is relationship, not ownership.
Yeah.
And that's where, going back to the beginning of our conversation, like, what is the context of that relationship? Are we co-participating in this? Certainly not if we're striking. I mean, that's such an old way of thinking of things, even with parents nowadays. So that's an old way that we can throw out, I think. Yeah, but just, are we in relationship? Are we co-creating this experience together? Because that is. Thank you for this conversation.
It's great.
Yes.
Podcast with no name.
Yeah, podcast with no name. Thanks for showing up to our first milestone for us. This is what happens behind the scenes every day with us here. So, all right. Namaste, everyone. Peace.